a couple of your members actually emailed David with some questions. So I'm going to start with number one. And the first one is, talk about the importance of cart alignment and how to achieve the best alignment results.
Okay. Before I do, I want to thank you all for organizing this. It means a lot to me. I've spent my life in audio, and I mean my whole life since I was literally 3. I knew where I was going. So I really appreciate being, having the time to share with your members and people that have tuned in. It means a lot to me. When I sit over there for 12 or 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, often people don't think about the work that goes behind what I do. So it's a great joy when I get emails from people who either purchased one of my designs or a cartridge I rebuilt, which was very, very difficult to do, and I didn't give up on it. It means a lot to me. It's emotionally satisfying. So the question was how to do the best cartridge tone arm alignment. Well, the very basic things you do. I mean, you start by roughing in the VTF, the vertical tracking force. You do the overhang, go back and make sure the tracking force is correct. We have a very elegant method on our website for doing the anti-skating. And I really want to emphasize that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because it's something that people don't get, and for good reason. Bare wall is typically the proper overhang adjustment for most things. People who listen to classical primarily should consider a Stevenson alignment because it has less phase error towards the end of the record. And most classical records have crescendos at the end, so you'd really like to get the phase alignment between the channels better towards the end of the record. So that's not talked about very often, or some people don't know, but Stevenson is a better alignment for those who, again, primarily listen to classical. Anti-skating is something that's a bit mysterious, and you'll see everything from manufacturers that tell you it's not important to turntables that have ridiculous scales for setting in. All of that is wrong. And even the test records that are out there are wrong. And fortunately, the world contains a gentleman named Frank Schroeder, who's one of the brightest audio engineers in the world, and he knows, I haven't found a subject he doesn't know about. His early life, he was one of the best watchmakers in the world. Frank's a very close friend and certainly a genius. And he pointed out years and years ago, a very simple method for doing anti-skating first order. And everyone I've shared it with over the many, many years, all of them have come back and said, oh, absolutely, it sounds better, makes sense. So I want to focus on that for a minute because it's one of the things about arm alignment that's really not well understood, or even why it's important. So first of all, anti-skating is a moving target because the amount of anti-skating that's required is a function of how loud the passage is at a given moment. So basically, it's tremendously important because if you think about it, let's say you've got a groove wall, let's say you're tracking at 2 grams. That's 1 gram per groove wall. If you do Schroeder's very simple test, which is on our website, where you place the stylus on the end of the record, on the surface of the record, not in the run-out groove, but on the surface, or if you happen to have a blank disc, you observe which way the arm moves. Does it move out, does it move in, and how rapidly? Now, according to Frank, you adjust the anti-skating so that it moves in very slowly. Now, you may say, wait a minute, why does this universal adjustment work for all styli, all cartridges, all tracking forces? It's actually very simple. The answer is very simple and very elegant. The bottom of the stylus, the radius at the tip, is pretty much a constant regardless of the shape of where the stylus hits the groove. So the frictional coefficient, the amount of drag it has on the surface from cartridge to cartridge to cartridge, is roughly the same. Frank pointed out that a lot of records that have a anti-skating track are recorded at 80 or 90% modulation level. So adjusting your anti-skating as they instruct to get equal distortion on each channel, or getting rid of the distortion, shifting it left and right so you get rid of it, well, that's fine. Only if you're listening to heavy metal only and hip hop, and or hip hop. It doesn't work for the rest of the music. So what Frank did was he reverse engineered a method with the understanding, the realization that if you look at the intensity of music on average, the intensity level is typically about 30 to 40% of full modulation. Of course, there are pianissimos and quiet moments. Of course, there are crescendos. But what you really want is equal force per groove wall, 1 gram on each groove wall if you're tracking at 2 grams for 95% of the time you're playing. Number one, it gives you equal stylus wear. Number two, it gives you equal record wear. And if the cartridge is designed correctly, those moments when you get crescendos where you're undercompensated for anti-skating, even though the force on the outer groove wall will go down and it will shift, if the cartridge is designed well, you won't miss track for that moment. So his concept is rational, as most of Frank's concepts are, and it's something that's easily done. It doesn't require any special tools, and it's quite brilliant. You know, consider if you do this test on your turntable, if you've got 2 grams of downward force and you watch the arm, and let's say the arm is flying in, that means you can have like 1.4 or 1.5 on the inner groove wall and a half a gram on the outer groove wall. It's not going to track properly. So think about how key that is and how many people really don't get it. The dial indicators on most turntables, you know, that show you should match it with the tracking. Try the experiment, you'll find that most of them are way off. So I'm really glad to talk about that for a moment. Vertical tracking angle, that's the cantilever angle, or stylus rake angle is more appropriate. Again, there's a lot of controversy about that in using USB microscopes. I don't recommend it. What I recommend, I mean, you can do it, but what I recommend is set the arm parallel to the record and go up or down from there to taste. And there are a lot of articles on the web about what to listen for, even what records to use to try and get it close. The reason being is that looking at the stylus shank with a USB microscope, there can be a couple of plus or minus a couple of degrees, even 3 degrees of the way the tracing edge is ground with respect to the shank. So it can vary from stylus to stylus. Plus, the way the stylus is mounted on the cantilever from any given manufacturer of stylus cantilever manufacturers, that can also vary. So looking at the vertical tracking angle, the angle of the cantilever, almost meaningless. So yeah, a USB microscope is fun, it's nice, but don't rely on it. The other thing is that when you're looking at it in static mode. As soon as you start to run the record, the cantilever swings up. So if you're going to use a USB microscope, start at about, get the angle at about 3 or 4 degrees and figure you're going to lose a couple when that cantilever swings up. From there, you want to tweak to taste. And a really good use of a USB microscope, by the way, is to look at the front of the cartridge. Nobody talks about that. A lot of the alignment systems on the market, when they adjust for azimuth, are not adjusting the stylus in the groove. They're adjusting the generator in the cartridge. Does the generator in the cartridge, is it lined up, or the two lined up by the manufacturer? No, and I know because I manufacture cartridges and I repair them. So what do you want? Do you want the generator to give you best separation and channel balance? Or do you want the stylus to fit the groove properly? Well, it's obvious. As you get into the more esoteric stylus shapes, contact line, some of the more esoteric contact lines, you want the stylus to fit the groove properly. So really good use of a USB microscope is to look head on and get that stylus vertical. Now there's always some leeway in the curvature of the stylus. So once you get it vertical, you can do a little tweaking to maximize channel separation, or maybe make the channel balance a little more equal. So you can do a little tweaking within reason. The conical doesn't matter, obviously, just set it electrically with one of these alignment systems, or just mechanically, you just make it vertical. But I wanted to say those two important things about stylus azimuth and anti-skating, because those are two things that people get wrong. And our cartridges, by the way, don't work with a lot of electrical alignment systems. I want to take a moment and talk about that. Sorry to take up so much time on the subject, but it's a very important subject. So these systems that align the generator, you know, assuming that the generator is lined up with the axis of the stylus, I mean, they'll work. In most cartridges, if they're good, the separation is 25 to 30 dB. Very good cartridge, 30 to 35. There's some notable $5,000 cartridges, no names mentioned, that have a spec of 28 dB. So because there's a lot of slop and you don't get huge amounts of channel separation, and you pray the manufacturer has lined up the stylus with the armature, doing an electrical alignment for azimuth is okay. It's a, sort of an okay place to start, sort of. But with a Soundsmith cartridge, because of the nature of the design, and I can maybe talk about that later, why it's so, our separation figures are dramatically different from the rest of the industry. And it's an important aspect as to why they are. So ours typically are 35 to 45. I've got a number of Hyperions I've made that I measured at 54 dB of channel separation. When you get up into those sort of stratospheric performance levels, the channel balance is not always symmetrical. That is, you could have one channel that does 35 dB of separation, the other that does 42. Is that a defective cartridge? No, just gives you an idea. When you get out to those extremes, the symmetry doesn't have to follow, and there are reasons for that. It might not. So when you use an electrical alignment system to get the channel separation equal, you're going to find the stylus whacked all the way off to one side. And we get plenty of emails saying, hey, I've got the channel separation equal, but I'm off. The cartridge is tipped 7 degrees. I'm saying, don't do that. So I wanted to explain why the electrical alignment systems are not good sometimes with Soundsmith cartridges. And at some point down the road, if I can stop doing Zoom meetings or answering the phone or other mundane things, joking, that I have to do as a business owner, I'll get to work to finishing our Cartwright system, which obviates those alignment issues with other cartridge alignment systems. So I apologize for prattling on and on about this, but I wanted to cover it reasonably well.
All right. Question number 2 is from Grant Stoner. I have a Soundsmith SMMC4 cartridge, and I think it's considered moving iron. What's the difference between that and moving magnet or moving coil?
Okay, so there are 3 things you can do with a magnetic cartridge to generate a voltage. Conductors, a little tiny course in physics. Conductors, this is a wire. Conductors are materials that have loose electrons in orbits, and they're easily pushed from one atom to the next. So if you take a magnet and you drag the magnet, you can drag the electrons around. If you hold the magnet still, you can move the wire and effectively, relatively move the electrons around. And these are both means of generating a current, a flow of electrons with the magnet and the conductor. Moving iron is a different animal. So in a moving iron cartridge, you have a fixed magnet and you have fixed coils. And what you do is you interpose a tiny little piece of iron, magnetic iron, between them. And that's hooked up to the cantilever. And the beauty of that system is, even though you're not moving the magnet, you're not moving the coils, moving this little tiny piece of iron changes the way the magnetic flux hits the coils, as if you were moving the magnet or as if you were moving the coils. The beauty of the system is there are many things that are gorgeous about it. Number one, magnets tend to be heavy, coils tend to be heavy. This way you're getting rid of all the moving mass to a huge degree. So the moving mass in our designs, the B&O, and of course the evolution of those into Soundsmith magnetic designs, is a internal generator mass reduction of 5 to 8 times, not 50 to 80%, literally 5 to 8 times, has a gigantic effect on cartridge performance. So that's what a moving iron cartridge is compared to a moving magnet or a moving coil.
Okay. From Alex P. Peter, could you talk about cartridge tone arm compatibility and how to plan a cartridge upgrade?
Well, cartridge tone arm compatibility is actually quite complex because there are a ton of things you can't control. The one thing you sort of can control is what's called the resonant frequency of the system. So every cartridge has a compliance, and that's the measurement of how easily the cantilever complies. That's where the word compliance comes from. Now, any sprung mass, so cantilever, stylus, mass at the back, and it's suspended, any sprung mass has a natural resonant frequency. Everything has a natural resonant frequency. This assembly, your cat, your dog, your spouse, your car, a bell. And the tone arm has mass too, and it's not a sprung mass, but it has its own natural resonant frequency because of the math. When you couple the two together, you're trying to get the resonance. Now, resonance is a standing wave. That's what rips wings off airplanes, takes bridges down, and so on. But fortunately, they're built well, so they don't do it. But a standing wave is where you add a bunch of energies in phase, so the amplitude, the volume adds. So a resonant point is where this whole cartridge tone arm starts to mechanically take off. You're trying to get that within 8 to 12 hertz. Why? Because everything that's recorded on the record is typically well below 6 hertz or 5 hertz, and the rumble of the turntable is typically 6 hertz or below. In terms of audio, usually recorded down to 20 hertz, but there can be some things that are, lower than that. So when you set the tone arm cartridge resonance between 8 and 12, you're likely not to put it into resonance. So it's what you're trying to avoid. That's why you want that resonant range to be between 8 and 12 hertz, so that it won't happen. Because when it happens, if you use a test record for measuring the resonance, you watch the tone arm, when you hit the whatever frequency it is, let's say 10 hertz, 9 hertz, the whole head shell starts to take off. That's how you know what frequency your resonance is. So you match the compliance of the cartridge with the mass of the arm. And there are a lot of ways of doing that. Vinyl Engine is a wonderful calculator for you, which allows you to do that. If you're interested in Soundsmith cartridges, we have a chart on our website that shows what the mass range of the arm should be versus a Soundsmith model. Other than that, matching a cartridge tone arm is a bit of magic, because there's so much going on with different tone arms, both good and bad by design, that it's impossible to tell you how one's going to sound with the other. It's almost like putting strings of a different manufacturer on a violin or a guitar. The results are going to be near infinite. So, because you're dealing with a huge number of variables. So in a way, you can look at it, well, this is fun and part of the art of audio. This match sounds great, or this cartridge sounds great on that arm, but nobody's going to tell you in an absolute way, this arm and this cartridge is a good match. Now I'm going to qualify that. There are some tone arms which are really beautifully made. And this is an important subject. Most cartridges, by their design, the energy that's sort of you try to damp out gets reflected back down the cantilever. I've given a lot of talks about that. What you really want is for the damped energy to get into the body of the cartridge, because you want the tone arm to ground it out or get rid of it. Some tone arms do a much better job of it than others, and a lot of cartridges don't get the energy out. The Soundsmith designs, it's one of the things I worked on really hard, and over the last 4 years, developed our new ES line, which does a really good job of getting the energy out. And it was manifest by an average channel separation measurement across our model spectrum of 3 to 5 dB. So it actually, it was actually demonstrable. But again, knowing which tone arm is going to ground out the energy and not have a lot of rattling or bearing movement, knowing which cartridge does a good job of getting the energy out instead of letting it rattle around, things that the average consumer are not going to be aware of, nor can they find out easily. So hopefully that covers nearly the complete subject of tone arm cartridge matching.
All right.
Okay, so questions.
Yeah. Next question from Bruce Lamaya. Sonic stylus cleaners, good or bad?
I'm not a big fan. Introducing ultrasonic energy into a stylus and cantilever system is just really not a good idea. You don't need sonic energy to clean a stylus properly. And, it's like, you don't need to wake someone up by shaking them at 50,000 times a second. A gentle tap on the shoulder is fine, or calling their name. So, no, I'm not in favor of sonic stylus cleaners. To me, it's a product that's, oh, geez, I got to be careful. Maybe somebody's got one on the market. I'm just preferring, I have this audio faith tradition. I don't say anything negative about products or talk about other people's products, but I can if they're no longer in business. So, geez, I don't know if somebody's making one now. I'm not a fan. So now that I've said it, what we recommend is something I've been using for years that I discovered, which is blue stick or blue tack, the blue stuff, not the gray stuff. And you smear some of it out and put it on a quarter, about half the thickness of a quarter, put it on the platter, cue down into it 3 or 4 times per play. And certain kinds of styli, especially ones that we use on certain of our high-end cartridges, can require a wet cleaning every once in a while because they tend to pull up debris on the back of the stylus. That's our OCL stylus. We do use that on our Hyperion where we don't recommend wet cleaning. So using the blue tack every time is incredibly successful at keeping the stylus spotless. We've obviously, we're the only company, now here's a shameless plug, we're the only company that rebuilds our cartridges. We do it for 20% or less. Our high-end ones are much less. The Hyperion's 11%, the Cicero I think is 12%, the AIDA is 13%. And I've gotten cartridges back with a lot of hours on them, people that have used our blue tack suggestion cleaning method, and the styli are spotless. Blue tack, there we go. And the stylus is just absolutely spotless. So good record hygiene using the blue tack, really excellent idea.
Just got some.
I'm sorry?
I just got some.
Oh, great. You know, liquid cleaners I'm against, and I can explain why. First of all, there are some Stylus lubricants out there, no names mentioned. Don't use them. There are a lot of the propellants, or I'm sorry, a lot of the solvents used in them are completely harmful to elastomeric materials and cartridges. And some people get really aggressive and they think they're using a tiny bit on the stylus, but it runs up the cantilever and into the cartridge. I've seen elastomers on moving coil on our cartridge just swollen 4 times their size. Don't use them. If you want to use a liquid, rubbing alcohol, 99%, 90%, fine. We have a procedure for modifying a watercolor brush on our website. Do that. But if you must do a liquid clean, but the blue tack works really, really well. And the reason liquid cleaners, stylus are held on with epoxy. Epoxy is hygroscopic. Epoxy absorbs moisture. You may have thought it was hermetic, and it doesn't. It does. So what it means was when you use let's say a solvent-based cleaner, let's say alcohol, on the stylus, some of the epoxy absorbs moisture as the alcohol evaporates and moisture from the air condenses on it, unless you live in Arizona. And the epoxy swells, the diamond doesn't. So you get a differential expansion between the diamond and the epoxy. Do that enough times and Elvis leaves the building. So that's why I'm not in favor of liquid cleaners unless it's necessary. So every once in a while, it's like me, I bathe only once or twice a month, you know, only when it's extremely, you know, necessary. Otherwise, I just dab blue tack all over myself.
That's why we're doing Zoom instead.
That's right. Why they keep me sitting on that chair. I'm not allowed to be in public.
Absolutely. Here's the next question from Alon. What was the inspiration behind your cactus needle cantilever?
That's a great question. So I have a very good friend. His name was Glenn Johnson. I worked with Glenn at IBM Research. When Glenn retired from IBM and I left IBM and I was running Soundsmith, Glenn came over all the time and we'd talk about all kinds of wonderful and crazy things. And I'm always looking for the dark corners in engineering where I can make an impact. I'm not a great marketer. That's not where my head's at. The thing about engineering, the reality of engineering, is that either you've got a boss breathing over your shoulder, get it done, or you're a sole entrepreneur, which audio has a lot of, and the pile of bills on the desk, or you've got a handful of employees or a little more, and you think about your overhead and you're looking at that and you're thinking, once you get something to work, just bring it to market. And your engineering, you know, the little voice, engineering voice in you says, no, keep playing with it. And the other voice says, well, you can play with it, but you'll be out of business. So nowhere is this more true where engineering gets only made to work, I think, than in the audio industry, because it's not life or death. So it's an opportunity, I think, for people like me that like to look at where the dark corners are, where people made things that were made to work, but were not perfected or brought close to perfection. So cantilevers is certainly one of them. Hadn't changed and put a number on it, 60 years. So I was sitting with my friend Glenn one day and I said, all right, we're going to do a little think tank here. Let's find a way to make a really, really good cantilever. I mean, one that solves all the known and existing cantilever problems that people don't want to talk about. And the third item on the list that I came up with was cactus spines. Well, about 10 years ago, Frank Schroeder, can't plug his name enough, called me on the phone and one day and he said, hey, Ledermann, what do you have on your invention list for cantilevers? I looked it up on the computer. I got to the third item. I said, cactus spines. He said, stop. Where are you with that project? I said, back burner, like 150 other inventions. He said, moves this up to the front burner, making sure to enlarge his fake German accent. And I said, why? He said, I've just put some in the mail to you. And unbeknownst to me, Frank, among his many hobbies and incredibly deep skill knowledge, is raising cactus. And it's no wonder that Frank thought of this as well, because if you look at his tone arms, he understands what happens to energies when they pass not only through materials, but when they pass from one type of material to another. He sent me some spines. I put them under the microscope. I dissected them. And were I not so circumferentially challenged, I would have kicked myself in the butt for not having really acted on the impulse years before. I built the first one, and one of the good tests you can do with a cartridge is an Audiophile test record that has a single pulse, a single 1 millisecond pulse. And if you look at a moving coil cartridge, what you typically see is it goes up and down, and then you get a couple of big rings and a bunch of small little rings. Typical. And again, it's trying to damp out the inertia, the stored energy in the moving system. So again, the problem with cantilevers is that the energy goes up, but it also goes back down to the degree that depends what the material is. So I retested our Cicero cartridge, which was our former top of the line. And because it has incredibly low moving mass and very little stored energy inside, went up and down, 2 small rings and then flat. Hooked up the first Hyperion, went up and down, flat. And I said, you've got to be kidding. Did a response check on it, how far out will it go? It's gorgeous. And realized it was a near perfect cantilever material. So that's how the Hyperion was born. It's they're very difficult to make. They are incredibly rugged, much harder to break than any other cantilever material. They're non-hygroscopic because each columnar cell, which is wrapped with fibrous bundles and a bunch of those in the spine, are designed, they're filled with resin and they don't absorb moisture. In fact, in the desert, that's how a cactus drinks. The dew forms on the spine in the morning and it repels the water. It runs down to the cactus bud, which is a bunch of little hairs the spine grows out of, and capillary force pulls it into the cactus. So it's been designed to withstand extremes of temperature, sunlight, moisture, for 100 years or more. So it's God's gift to vinyl. And that's how it got born. And that's why I love it so much.
Okay, good. The next question is from Kenny Chow. General guidelines on choosing cartridges. And by the way, I am typing in for everybody links to our website to specific questions, and this is one of them. But Peter, if you could address general guidelines on choosing cartridges, and I'll post this.
Sure. So obviously we talked about resonant frequency. You've got to look at the compliance of the cartridge. You have to think about what sort of a stylus you can put up with. If you don't care about alignment, you can go with a cartridge that has a conical, like the infamous Delon 103. Great moving coil cartridge at a fantastic price, and you don't just set it down, it's going to play for you. I'm a conical bigot because conicals have known problems, but if you really don't want to worry about alignment, it's a good cartridge for the money, even though it's a conical. So you want to think about how much you want to fuss with your cartridge. So we make cartridges, one actually with a hyperelliptical, nude hyperelliptical, requires some alignment, but a little less fussy than contact line. So you want to think about how much you want to fuss with the alignment. That's certainly number one. Number two, and this is something you unfortunately can't do, but when you're comparing cartridges, it's sort of like comparing the character of a human being. You can't tell a lot about them when times are easy, but when times get rough, have a good look at how they're reacting. The same is true with a phono cartridge. So when you're listening to most music, most phono cartridges are going to play reasonably well. But when you have a very, very busy moment, let's say a crescendo, that's when you want to pay a whole lot of attention in a very, very narrow period of time. And you want to see how muddy or distorted it gets, or if the instruments stay combed out. Does the sound stage stay the same? In the famous Firebird recording, Mercury recording, there are a lot of crescendos where there's literally a triangle going on in the background with this incredible cacophony of instruments. And the better the cartridge, the better all those instruments will stay combed out. So that's a dynamic way to kind of listen to how well is that stylus staying in contact with the groove wall. It's an interesting thing. So although most people think they should listen to the timbre of the instruments and how it sounds to them and so on, if you really want to know how well a tire performs, corner at high speed and see how well you're stuck to the road. So
Okay, and there's a link.
And by the way, obviously you need to decide if your preamp does, only high output cartridges or it'll do low output, what the loading capabilities of your preamp. Our low output cartridges require 470 ohms minimum load. So although over the years, phono preamp designers have decided to make their preamps much more flexible, and thankfully they've done that. If your phono preamp, if your high gain moving coil phono preamp only loads at 50 or 100 ohms, there are certain cartridges you're not going to be able to use, like Soundsmith. So you want to really make sure your preamp's compatible as well.
All right, this next question is from G. Morgan. Can you talk about high compliance versus low compliance arm matching? I have an SME 3009 Series 2 non-improved that will be fitted to a Thorens TD 124 Mark I once rebuilt, and I'd like to make sure I get the proper matched cartridge. Thanks. Also, I have thoroughly enjoyed your videos on YouTube.
Well, I don't know whether to be happy for you or sad for you. I'll just be happy for you. Again, at the beginning of the talk, I talked about ARM cartridge matching for compliance. Vinyl Engine's a great place to look at compliance and cartridge weight and so on versus your arm mass. So if I remember correctly, I'm getting kind of old. The 3009 is kind of a low mass arm. So you've got to stick with a medium compliance, maybe even a high compliance cartridge, but I think medium compliance. But again, look at a chart on Vinyl Engine, and that'll get you where you need to be in terms of compliance.
Okay, and the videos are on our website. Kenny Chow said, mistakes to avoid. That's a pretty broad thing, isn't it?
Don't step on the crack and break your grandmother's back. Mistakes to avoid. Using a lot of wet cleaner on a stylus, having the anti-skating wrong. I'm not sure what you mean by mistakes.
Well, one of my favorites, Peter, is you telling people, don't talk to your records. They're not listening to you.
Thank you. So yeah, you're supposed to listen to them. So I have two Norman lathes. I have a charity record label called DirectGrace Records. Not a shameless plug. We rescue children from severe forms of slave labor, and of which there are 215 million of them. And one of the first things I discovered, I was a little bit shocked, was when I started doing lacquer cuts and dub cuts. I had taken a brand new lacquer out of the box, and I was talking with the group. We were recording live, and I turned, and it had spots, little spots all over it. And it didn't look like that a minute before. And then I realized we all spit when we talk, even though we don't want to think about it or realize it, we all do.
Well, I guess we learned that with the pandemic, didn't we?
Yeah. Um, so um, on a grooved record, you're not going to see that you've spit on it. And the problem with spit is that it's pretty nasty stuff. And it once it starts drying, it turns into glue. So I've had customers where we've sold a brand new cartridge and they've get back in touch and they're angry. I played 2 records and it's completely distorted. They send it back for repair. And the stylus, just look, you can't even see the stylus. It looks like just a wad of hair that's been flattened on the bottom. There's just no view. You know, the stylus is completely invisible. This is typically, and that was after 1 play or 2 plays. This is typically because the stylus has picked up some spit and then the, you know, dust and other contaminants that are in the air that are always on the record. Well, glue picks that up really well. So you wind up with a fur ball on the stylus and so on. So I tell people, don't talk to your records. Take them out of the sleeve. Somebody asks you a question, turn your head, wait, put it on the turntable and turn your head away and talk. I used to, at shows, people would come and they'd look down at my turntable and they'd be talking right at it. And I finally put a little sign, please don't talk at my records. And a lot of people got it. But yeah, don't talk to your records. Thank you, John. That's an important thing. That's a mistake that people make and they don't realize it. Spit's really hard to clean off records. Gee, I could think of a bunch of really humorous things what not to do. But you know, a lot of people say, why should I put an expensive cartridge on my medium priced turntable? And I tell them at a certain price point and down, the cartridge is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So you'll get a lot better performance by putting a higher performance cartridge, even on a, you know, a medium price turntable. You know, it's like a baton race. If you drop the baton on the first go round, the other runners look kind of foolish. We've certainly run into people that have had $5,000 and $10,000 turntables that have put $500 cartridges on them or less. Not that all $500 cartridges are bad, but when you consider the cartridge is doing most of the heavy lifting, you've got to spend quite a bit of money on a turntable and tone arm for it to start making major, major contributions on the level of what the cartridge does. So with Soundsmith, here's a shameless plug, we recommend going as high up as you can afford because our cartridges are rebuildable. So maybe you're going to get a better turntable or tone arm down the line or not, but it's a good investment. So we tell our customers for getting the best performance, whether you buy a Soundsmith cartridge or not, make a good investment in the cartridge. It's sort of like buying really good speakers, you know, it's going to have a big impact.
All right.
Move on.
Next one. How does Peter like Frank's LT? That's from Fred Stanky. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Okay, I didn't quite understand when he says Frank's LT, that's Frank's linear tracking arm,
Yep.
but I didn't understand the reference to the name.
Oh, Fred Stanky is the person who actually asks the question.
Understood. Sorry. Frank's, we actually helped Frank write the patent for that arm. It's just a gorgeous tone arm. I don't know what else to say. It's everything that Frank does is genius. One of my goals in life is to catch him at a mistake, and it's been a lot of years, and I've not been able to do it. You know, he's given us a tone arm design, which COVID has delayed production of. It's called the Alto. It's on our website. The beautiful thing about Frank's arms is they don't wear out. They don't degrade with time. They won't degrade with an accident. You know, I once asked Frank about one of his models and what I had to do to prep it for moving it. And his answer was, this is a hammer disguised as a tone arm. And I laughed like hell. It was funny, but it's true. His designs don't degrade with time, whereas most every machine made by man degrades with time. Why can Frank do that? He's a bloody genius. So obviously his LT arm, you know, solves, you know, the radial arm tracing problems, so overhang problems. So yeah, it's a beautiful arm. It's a gorgeous arm. So.
Okay. The next question is from, it's from Fred again. Have you tried iSonic LP Cleaner?
I don't know who that is, and I'm not going to comment about a manufacturer. Is there a specific question about the type of cleaning? Is it an ultrasonic cleaner? Is they asking about what do I think about ultrasonic cleaning?
It's probably ultrasonic cleaners.
So, um, I mean, cavitation is something that certainly works. It was used at IBM when IBM had to switch over from Freon to ultra-pure water. People are not aware of this, nor should they be, but IBM was the world's worst polluter of the environment in terms of Freon, because IBM, unbeknownst to most people, was the world's largest producer of silicon. People probably think about other silicon manufacturers as being the largest. IBM was actually the largest. And we use tons of Freon because Freon is just a phenomenal way of cleaning. You can make it ultra pure, it leaves no trace, it evaporates quickly. So when IBM had to go get away from Freon, they went to 5-9's water to clean wafers, silicon wafers, as they're producing them. And the problem is once the water gets into a narrow cavity, it doesn't evaporate readily. So a gentleman in my group who won a huge IBM award started cavitating the wafer to agitate, put energy into the molecules so they evaporated quickly. It's seemingly simple, but a really elegant solution. So cavitation is a known process also for cleaning. So I'm not going to say anything negative about it. The only thing I don't like about it is that if you don't clean the water repeatedly, you're putting a record into dirty water. I think it's probably an okay cleaning method if you do some kind of a rinse, or if you have 2 of them, or use some sort of a DI water rinse afterwards to clean any potential residue left on the record. I don't use an ultrasonic cleaner personally because I like my fillings where they are. And I tell people if you have one, put it in a back room, load it up with records, turn it on, close the door, and go back into the other room and listen to records.
All right. Here's the next question. Do you have a favorite type of cartridge? Moving coil, moving magnet, moving iron, strain gauge, or even optical?
So obviously I'm a little biased towards my designs because of the principles in which they work. I love the Hyperion. It is a breakthrough cartridge, and I love the strain gauge. And there are some records, I listen 80% of the time to the strain gauge and 20% of the time to the Hyperion. But a lot of our customers have tone arms with both. And they'll have a Paua or a Cicero or a Hyperion on one and a strain gauge on the other, because there are people that really know that there are certain recordings that are just not like other recordings. And the problem with the strain gauge is that it's sort of like a really beautiful, beautiful, beautiful woman. She's really good at 5 feet or beyond, or 10 feet or beyond, but if you get close enough, you're going to see flaws. And this is the problem with the strain gauge. If there's any defect in the record, you're going to hear it, because the strain gauge is as close to neutral as anything I think that's ever been made. So if the record's made really, really well, the record's going to disappear and you're going to hear the master tape. If the master tape's not been done well, or the record's not been made well, or mastered, or the strain gauge is going to reveal it. So you kind of want to hide some of the defects. So in that sense, a magnetic cartridge, whether it's Soundsmith or somebody else's, is going to hide some of that. It's going to integrate out some of the defects and may sound a little better. So we certainly have a lot of customers that will have one of our magnetics on one arm and the strain gauge on the other, and they'll play certain records with certain cartridges. So it's sort of like, there's some days you want to ride one horse, and there are other days you want to ride another horse.
All right, G. Morgan came in, and I'm not sure whether he joined a little later, but any chance the Cactus cantilevers will work their way down the line?
Don't need audio for that.
Is it possible to get Frank Schroeder's contact information in order to request a presentation? Probably
not. A presentation, I don't
know. About Cactus cantilevers, probably.
No, Frank's not involved in that. This was something Frank was very diplomatic, because he knows how. And he called me and asked me what was on my design list or development list for materials. And he waited till I got to Cactus Spine when he stopped me and said, "Good, I put some in the mail to you." That's incredibly diplomatic. And that's Frank. But Frank doesn't make cartridges, nor has he done all the experiments. Frank has one of my Hyperion cartridges, and I'll keep private what he told me about it. But Frank, it's not Frank's business. It's not his industry to make cartridges.
Okay. Larry Brown has a question. How can one find phono stages that work correctly with your moving iron cartridges? The moving coil stages usually have too much gain. Moving magnet stages often have too little gain and typically do not have the correct electrical characteristics required for your cartridges. Is there any way to adjust our current moving coil stages to work correctly with your moving coils?
Okay, I think you're bringing up a lot of problems that don't exist to the scale that you're kind of implying that they do, but there are some compatibility issues, and I'm glad to talk about them. So let's talk about the high output moving iron cartridges. There is no industry standard for what a high output cartridge should put out. And the scale is broad. It goes anywhere from 1.5 millivolts up to 5 millivolts. So obviously the amount of gain the phono preamp has is going to have a huge effect with how comparable the resultant level is going to be with your other sources. So our moving iron high output cartridges are 2.2 millivolts. It's on the lowish end of high output cartridges. So the gain should be between 40 and 44 dB. Are there some fixed gain moving magnet preamps out there that have really low gain? Yes. Down around 34? Yes. Why do people do that? Well, they're usually low cost preamps, and they're designed for low cost moving magnet cartridges that have 4 or 5 millivolts output. I don't recommend a cheap phono preamp because, again, the chain is the chain. You put a weak link in it, you get what you get. So, excuse me. But in terms of compatibility, our high output cartridges are standard moving magnet load of 47K. So there really is not a huge compatibility issues. Our phono preamp that we designed for high output cartridges is at 43 dB. And again, most moving magnet preamps are typically around 40, or they're adjustable. So that's not a huge issue. The more important issue comes with compatibility for our low output cartridges and moving coil preamps. As I mentioned earlier, a long time ago, moving coil preamps typically only had a fixed load of 100 ohms. In the recent 10 or 15 years, preamp manufacturers have become hip to the fact that you really need to load correctly. So they'll have an array of loading options from 10 ohms to 50 to 100 to 200 to 400, 600, 800, 1,000. So really not a compatibility issue anymore. But certainly if you're looking, as I mentioned earlier, the Soundsmith low output cartridge, you want to make sure you can load at 470 or 500 ohms. Gain, our output is 0.4 millivolts, a very typical of a common moving coil cartridge. So required gain is typically 60 to 65.
All right. Alon, you get the best question of the day. Is the stack of pennies I have on top of my head shell the best way to keep the stylus in the groove?
Absolutely. And if you can get a small animal, like a hamster, to sit on that head shell, put a little hat on him, take some video, you'll find that also will work really well. And if you put some seed on the head shell, that tends to keep the hamster on the head shell.
I'll try it out.
Good deal.
Send me the video. Please send me the video.
And Peter, I think it goes without saying that you can always get a step-up device for one of your cartridges if you own a phono stage that isn't capable of reproducing the sound adequately. That's an easy way to.
I'm glad you brought that up. So let me talk about that compatibility. So let's say you have a moving magnet preamp and you want to use one of our low output cartridges. So there are a lot of transformers in the market. You want to use a transformer that has a ratio of 1 to 10 or 20 dB of gain. Why? Because the way you calculate the effective load is you take the denominator in the ratio and you square it. So 1 to 10, you get 100. And you take the load of a moving magnet preamp, which is 47,000, divided by 100, magic, you get 470 ohms. So a 1 to 10 step up is what you would use with your moving magnet preamp with one of our low output cartridges. Thank you for bringing that up. And we have a page on our website that describes transformer use with Soundsmith low output cartridges.
Yeah, let me see if I can bring that up, and I'll post it.
Okay.
Here's another one from Fred. I don't quite know about this because I'm not an audiophile, but are edge clamps a good idea if you do not have vacuum? Is vacuum better than center plus edge clamping?
So there aren't many turntables that have vacuum. I can tell you that vacuum in principle is a great idea. The only fear with vacuum is that you're introducing some noise into the platter. So a very clever engineer will make sure that the vacuum noise won't get into the record. Most of the vacuum platter systems I've seen are obviously have a very compliant top surface, which also serves to damp the record. So I would think would damp the record against any noise generated by the air vacuum system. Edge clamping is nice. The whole subject, by the way, of record clamping is absolutely fascinating. And it's something that when I retire, I'm going to do a lot of research on because it is quite captivating. And I'll tell a very quick story. By the way, there was a gentleman, I think his name was Goldsmith or Goldstein, who did some really interesting experiments back in the 60s. They were quite brilliant, where he had a record which had a silent groove. He had a record made that had a silent groove, and then he had inner grooves that had modulation, like orchestral. And he played the orchestral music with one arm, and he listened to the silent groove with the other arm, the cartridge. What a brilliant idea. So simple. And obviously what he was listening for was how much energy was propagating through the record. So now that I've planted that seed, I was years ago with Frank Schroeder and a bunch of people at an audiophile's house in Colorado. Very nice gentleman. And Frank told me to sit in the sweet spot. It was a horn system. I'm not a big horn fan, but this thing actually sounded really, really nice. And, just like your spouse, you can get used to almost anything over time. So he said, don't look at what I'm doing. And he played me an orchestral. Larry's smiling at me every time I make a joke. Frank played me a particular passage. He said, don't look at what I'm doing. And I listened to it. And then he took about 10 seconds and he queued it up again. And I mean, I don't have the best ears in the world, but it was like, holy crap, what did you just do? And I looked over at him and he held up 2 wooden record weights that were just different material. And I said, you're kidding. He said, no, I wanted you to hear that. So it's a fascinating aspect and field of analog that I hope to do some research in one day. I can tell you that there is a lot of stuff on the market, and I don't know how much real research goes behind that. I can tell you, being an engineer, it's incredibly hard to get your ego separated from your baby or your inventions and your designs. So real research should be done and presented, even in a very general way, so the public can understand, here's the research that I did, which demonstrates that this works over a broad range of circumstances. And that's why I think this is a good product. You don't see that very often with audio products, which is unfortunate.
All right. This is Charles Zorn, and I just think this is just in general. Cavitation can clean or destroy, and it destroys very well.
Reread that, please.
Cavitation.
I want you to remumble that, John.
Cavitation, C-A-V-I-T-A-T-I-O-N.
I couldn't hear what you said after that, though.
Can clean or destroy, and it destroys very well, ...
I don't know what you mean. Vinyl is pretty tough. So putting it in water that's, activated at 50 kilohertz is not going to hurt the vinyl. Contaminants in the water will hurt the vinyl. People clean out their brush. People use DI water in their record cleaners and then take the velvet brushes out, no names mentioned, run them under tap water. And then they dry them and then they put them back and they go, I don't know what just happened. My brand new record's got noise all over it. It's like, yeah, you ran it under tap water. What did you think was going to happen? So the water is really, purity is really critical. And, when I've given talks in the past, one of the subjects which I absolutely love is there was a technical paper. In fact, let me bring this up now because I hope you guys won't mind. I love this. And it has to do with record cleaning. So now that the subject, I've not really connected the two before, but they're obviously connected. So give me a moment. I'm going to do a share screen and I'm going to try to pull this up if I can. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Can everybody see this? A couple of nods. David? Okay. So this was an engineering article done by Audiophile, and I love this. So it gets a little technical in the beginning and blah, blah, blah. But here's the meat down here. So the displacement, which is the movement of the groove of a 10 kilohertz signal, only 50 dB below of the loudest you can record, a peak, it's not the loudest, but below a peak of 10 centimeters, which is not the loudest you can record, displaces 0.005 microns. It makes the groove all move 0.005 microns. That's 50 times the diameter of small hydrocarbon molecules. I did some calculations. Then it goes on, it says the scale is almost impossible to grasp intuitively, but a cartridge can trace it. And the signal when amplified can be easily heard. Certainly any vibrations in the record playing system significantly greater than 0.005 micron can be expected to distort the cleanliness of low-level, high-frequency reproduction. That's where your imaging is, that's where. So a designer must absolutely control all spurious vibrations, be they generated by the commonly considered external sources, feedback, footfalls, here it comes, internal mechanical sources, the bearing, or the crucial groove stylus energy interface itself. So if you watch any of my lectures, I'm always talking about stylus jitter, where that energy comes from, reflected back down from the cartridge. So I did some calculations. There are two things I want to mention, which are, to me, they're fascinating. So it says 50 small hydrocarbon molecules. That's with like a good cartridge. So that means a really good cartridge and tone arm. Now let's make it 20 small hydrocarbon molecules. Let's pick benzene. So I calculated the distance. And if you consider that a step resolution, and actually the step resolution is finer than that, much, much finer. If you look at 24-bit digital, the step resolution of a good cartridge in a groove is 200 times better. It's fascinating to me that over the years, people have said, well, why is analog better than digital? Or why can it be? It isn't always, but why can it be? There's the answer. And it's a little concerning that Audiophile ran the football down the field and stopped and just placed it 2 yards in front of the goal, in front of the end zone, and just didn't say, here, touchdown. Because what they did was they said, this is why analog can be far superior in one respect to digital. The step level is so much more granular than 24-bit that you've got that kind of resolution. I'm not talking about samples per second now. That there's obviously sampling in digital, and I talk about sampling in analog. That's a different area. It's a different field you can plow. But in this one area, it's incredible, at least 200 times better than digital. And now let's get back to your record cleaning. If it'll pick up 20 small hydrocarbon molecules, what's it going to do with the crap that's in your tap water? Don't use tap water. You're going to get it on the record, and once you press it into the groove, you will not remove it. And I know because I've tried. Okay. I'm starting to get upset now. No, I'm joking.
Take it easy now.
Okay, I'm going to take it easy.
Take it easy.
All right.
All right, I'm trying to get to the other questions, and I'm typing in some links that I needed to share with a bunch of other people.
Okay, but I wanted to mention that research that Audiophile had done. I just thought it was brilliant and beautiful, and I think it satisfies those of us that have been analog fans our whole lives, or for a good portion of it, and have listened to really, really superior analog system and said, yep, that does it. That just does it. And that's here's a technical explanation that you won't find anywhere, which I thought is really important to give.
All right. Here's one from David Hicks. I've inspected many styli under my laboratory microscope and have noted a few Soundsmith cartridges that have been on my bench have excellent stylus mounts in that they have very close to ideal geometrical alignments. How do you achieve such consistency? Do you do the mounts in-house or contract it out?
I have to break in and say that was from J.R. Bosclair, who put it in the
Oh,
Q&A section. But
gotcha.
I wanted to
Well,
get it to
I've
your
got some
attention.
Q&As that I'll get to in a minute here.
All right.
But thanks. Thanks, David.
So,
Yes, I see it's from JR.
all right. So the answer to that is the same answer the cop gave to the guy who was looking for Carnegie Hall in New York City. Practice, practice, practice. I've always loved to do tiny things. It's a scale in a world that is fascinating to me. It's an amazing thing to make a phono cartridge. You're doing this incredibly microscopic assemblage of parts that has to play a microscopic sculpture and results in absolute magic. So I'm really bloody careful. Do I see cartridges from other manufacturers where they're not careful? Sure. But you have to appreciate this is a dying field. I mean, I've heard more than anecdotal stories about, a room of people in China and Japan, making cartridges, and everybody in the room is 80 years old. These are not skills that are readily found. The people that work here at Soundsmith are people that I've combed through and trained, and I sit on them, whether they're doing, electronic restoration, which we've done for 50 years, or building cartridges or doing repairs. Soundsmith has been a mentoring company for 50 years. That's its primary function, even though we manufacture. And I'm trying to teach the art of audio because it is a lost art and it will be gone. And all the legacy engineers will be gone in 10 years. We've lost quite a few. So when you ask, how do we align styli real well? We give a damn and we do our best. We're human, we make mistakes, not too many. We really try hard, but I really appreciate your bringing that up.
Yeah.
Again, when my arms and legs and butt goes numb from sitting there for 12 hours, it's always lovely to get an email from somebody who says, I just bought one of your cartridges and my wife's really pissed off because I was up half the night. My listening room is strewn with records. It's like I never heard them before. And I go home with a smile on my face. So I really, it means a lot.
And the second part of that was, do you do the mounts in-house or contract it out? Everything's done in-house.
Yeah, we do pretty much everything in-house. Yeah. It depends. If it's a very low cost assembly, then some of those we purchase, made as is, but we do adjust them. So, people are afraid of me. So they do their work really carefully.
You don't look.
I'm afraid of me, for God's sake.
So, you don't look scary, Peter.
I'm very scary. I can't sleep. Okay. I scare myself.
Okay. Passionate.
Say again?
I said you're passionate.
I am passionate. It's a wise man once said, halfway measures will avail you nothing. And in the world, you often see people, I guess I don't want to get religious on everybody, but in the Bible, it says we come as beggars and thieves. It's always the light fighting the dark. There's a part of us that when we find a $20 bill on the ground, the first reaction is, oh boy, not, oh my God, where's the poor kid whose Aunt Betty gave that to him? He's probably crying his face off. There's a part of us that would like to find the easy way out. And I've got that just like the next man or woman, but I'm aware of it. And being aware of it, I think, is important. So I try hard.
All right, here's another question from the Q&A. I've always wondered if a rebuilt cartridge ends up sounding like the original, or if that's not the case. It seems that cantilever material in length and diamond shapes available for rebuilds would be so limited compared to what the original manufacturers would have used.
Okay, well, that's actually not true. So apologies for refuting what you're saying. As I mentioned earlier, when I was talking about cantilever materials, there are a limited number of cantilever materials in the world. albeit there are some very esoteric ones, such as what Shure used, the beryllium foil, and there's obviously boron tubes, sapphire tubes. There are some esoteric cantilevers, but generally there are a limited number of materials. You have your super hard materials like boron, ruby, sapphire, which is the same material, and then you've got aluminum and aluminum alloys. There are a limited number of stylus shapes. You have conicals, you have ellipticals, you have bonded ellipticals, faux ellipticals, hyperelliptical, and then you have contact line, which are generally the same, and then you have some esoteric contact line. But once you rebuild the cartridge, with let's say the original stylus design, which we do as often as possible, and if we have to replace the cantilever, we try to replace with the original material, unless somebody wants to experiment and go with a different material. Yeah, that'll change the characteristic of the cartridge. Case in point, we do a lot of the Denon 103s. We've been doing them forever. And when we replace the aluminum with either sapphire and a line contact, or ruby and a very esoteric line contact, or boron, invariably the customer will get back to us and say, wow, I didn't know this cartridge could perform like that. So, but the other thing is that No Names mentioned, we touched on this earlier, there are a lot of cartridge manufacturers that are really mass producing, and we get cartridges that are not made well. And when we rebuild them, we're spending a lot of time with them. So we make sure the alignment's right. So a lot of people get their cartridge back, even with the same stylus shape, same original materials, and say, this thing never sounded like that. Well, yeah, nobody ever inflated your tires or balanced them. So the car is now driving really well. So there is that. But in principle, what you're suggesting is actually not true. We try and stay as original as possible. And although I can't promise someone that a cartridge I rebuilt is going to sound exactly like it did when it came out of the box, because how could I do that? I never tell anyone what they're capable of hearing. The chances are it's going to perform very, very well. And so I'll leave it at that.
All right, so Dennis asks, Lyra and Spiral Groove work together to make a cartridge setup a little simpler by putting alignment holes in the head shell and cartridge top. Are you or any other manufacturer cartridge makers adopting this system?
Well, obviously, Riaa does that. So the Riaa has a 3-point system. No, we're not doing that. I've certainly thought of doing it. But then what we're doing is we're modifying one of our cartridges for mounting in a certain turntable. So no, we're typically not doing it. The reason is we're trying to minimize confusion. Although you would think doing that would minimize confusion, what you're doing is you're confusing the customer, because you're saying, oh, well, you have to have this turntable to use this feature. So I've tried to learn my lesson from marketers who've told me, keep it simple, stupid, because once you confuse the customer, they will move on.
All right. Ron says, is there a test record you could recommend?
No, I mean, certainly the Acoustic Sounds makes a very nice test record. Ortophon test records are nice. I use an array of records. I have some private label test records that I purchased from a gentleman who was a cartridge reviewer, and I got all 300 of his test records, which was, from a gentleman in the industry who said, you need these. So, but the Acoustic Sounds test record is a nice test record. Again, don't buy into the anti-skating track. The Ortophon is a nice test record for measuring cartridge resonance, which is great. So you can actually see where it fell. But you don't need a lot of them. In terms of listening, there are certain records that I listen to. I'm a big Janician fan, and the Breaking Silence album is just, I don't know, it was nominated for a Grammy, but why it didn't win is a complete mystery to me. But on the side one, first song, she says the word spit 3 times, and the second time she says spit, it's sibilant. And if you want to measure how well a cartridge performs with sibilance, that's a good spot. There are certain test records I have that I use for listening to new designs or rebuilt cartridges, just to see how well they're going to perform. Again, as I said earlier, not when times are easy, but when times are rough. So finding those records is a real plus for people that want to find out how well their cartridge and tone arm are performing.
All right, Dennis asked, the Soundsmith website lists 5 stylus types among the cartridge selection options. Can you go over these types and their relative strengths and weaknesses? What is the difference between contact line and OC contact line? Who makes styli? Do all cartridge makers get them from the same sources?
Okay, so I'm going to start at the end. There are a limited number of people in the world who make styli. It's a very, very tiny industry. So I'll start there. The optimized contour contact line, a normal contact line traces about 60% of the groove wall. Our optimized contour is very much like a cutting stylus, and it traces about 80 or even 90% of the groove wall. So there are advantages, and of course, other stylized shapes, contact line, hyperelliptical, ellipticals, bonded ellipticals, conicals. We don't use conicals. All styli are compromises. That's probably the best way to look at it. Conicals have advantages, but huge disadvantages, so I don't use them. Ellipticals are nice. When you trace the groove wall, if you're only tracing 20 or 30% of it, your chances of hitting a defect or noise are statistically reduced. If you use a contact line that does 60%, you can integrate out some defects and it may or may not play better. If you're tracing a lot of the groove wall with our optimized contour, any dirt is going to be picked up, but your force per unit area is reduced. This is a complex and interesting subject. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it, but if you think about the surface area of where the stylus hits the groove, a conical is like, if you were to draw a round circle or a surface area, a conical is like this, an elliptical is an ellipse like that, contact line is a narrow thing like that, like a line, and an optimized contour is a really thin line. So the surface area of how much it touches the groove varies. A contact line is double the surface area of certain ellipticals. So you think about it, all right, I've got 1 gram per groove wall. So if I have a very small contact area, the force per unit area is very high. I double that, now the force per unit area is lower. So how much it's pressing against the groove wall is reduced, which means it could chatter more easily, which means your cartridge has to perform better as you get up into contact line because you've not necessarily changed the amount of tracking force. This is a really interesting thing to even contemplate. So it's sort of like driving down the road with a bicycle tire as opposed to a really wide tire. The wide tire is less force per unit area, so you get more friction. It's not a really good analogy, but Azul, quiet down. So if you think about it for how much force per unit area in terms of the stylus per groove wall, that the cartridge actually has to perform better for a line contact than it does for an elliptical. It's a really interesting thing to think about, and I've not heard anyone talk about it, and I usually don't, but it's an interesting subject area.
Yeah, when you mentioned tires, Azul obviously wanted to go chase a car.
He drives my car, so he said, "Car, are we going in the car?" I like to bite the tires.
A wowie.
Wowie. Yes, what else do we have?
Are linear tracking tone arms superior, and what are any aspects of concern?
In principle, yes, but the reason the world is populated with radial arms is because they're generally easier to build. So it's harder to build a linear arm and maintain it and have it perform over time than it is a radial arm. But obviously, in principle, a linear arm is better. But again, making sure it's maintained properly and it performs over its lifetime can be more difficult. And of course, the expense.
David, we're going to bypass your question. We've gone over record cleaning methods, and so you can go back and check the YouTube and see what we answered about that, but we need to move on. What makes SPU cartridges different than other MC cartridges?
So again, it's part of my audio faith tradition not to talk about manufacturers or their designs if they're still in business. So I can't really comment on Audiophon's SPU cartridges. I rebuild them as well as I do a lot of other cartridges. So.
Okay. How can one find phono stages that work correctly with your moving iron cartridges?
We've already did that. Yep.
We've already gone over that.
You can always buy a Soundsmith preamp.
Yeah. Oh, shameless plug. What are your thoughts on the ultra low impedance cartridges and current gain phono stages?
Okay, so very, very interesting subject. So there are these cartridges that are, so here's how to think of a cartridge. A cartridge is somewhere between, and this gets technical, so I'll apologize up front. A cartridge is somewhere between a voltage source and a current source. So that doesn't mean much to most people, which is fine. But as you get into these super low output cartridges, the internal impedance looks like a brick wall. It's very low resistance. Now, what's the good and the bad and the ugly of these ultra low output cartridges and current preamps? The nice thing about current preamps is that, let me back up a little. Somebody once, I'm going to really back up, go off on a little bit of a tangent. I'll come back. I'll swear. And if I don't, just ring my phone or something. Somebody once asked me what the difference between an audio engineer and a recording engineer was. And I chuckled a little bit and I said, somewhat facetiously, I said, well, a really, really good audio engineer will design the most linear, minimalistic path to pass the signal through. And he'll spend a lot of time developing that. A recording engineer will pass the signal through daisy chaining through every piece of equipment he owns in the studio because he owns it. Every time you pass a signal through another circuit, you degrade it. So step-up transformers. There are a lot of them in the world. Necessary evil? Yes, because it's extremely hard to make a low noise, high gain preamp. Transformers are magical. They give you huge amounts of voltage gain with no noise. Hey, you don't get something for nothing in this world. What's the takedown? Well, the takedown is they're not perfectly linear and they introduce their own distortions. Are they huge? No. Are they there? Sure. Why does one transformer sound different than another? Oh. So in principle, getting back to where I drifted off to, not using a transformer in principle should be better than using one. Plus, transformer matching to cartridges gets real tricky because, again, they change the way they sound. Current preamplifiers that are used with low output cartridges avoid using step-up transformers. So in principle, it's a plus. Plus, there are a lot of DIY designs that you can build that are current or transconductance phono stages for those that are really love to build their own stuff. You don't need a transformer. Perfect. All right, what's the downside? A current preamp is not compatible with all cartridges. They're generally not compatible with Soundsmith low output cartridges. Why? You can't get the proper load on them. So they're limited. So you've got to be really, really careful when you buy a transconductance or current preamp, as opposed to what most of the world is, which are voltage preamplifiers. You've got to be really careful that it's going to be compatible with your current cartridge or going forward. The other thing I don't like about ultra low output cartridges is that the contacts, and you think about this, you're dealing with such tiny, tiny voltages. The resistance of the contacts, your cables, the connectors to the back of the cartridge, those have to stay perfectly, good in terms of ohmic contact. And I can tell you, the moment you make a slide-on connection, whether it's a plug or a phono connector, it starts to degrade from day one. So keeping those at low ohmic contact can be a little bit of a challenge. So it requires you've got, really, really clean connections, and you maybe gold on them, and you make sure that they stay that way. So that's the other slight drawback to these super low output current source cartridges. Not so much the case when you get into, normal moving coil or medium output or high output cartridges. One of the things we toyed with, although marketing people beat me up, was we made an array of medium output cartridges, which confused the crap out of the public. And I did that because there are preamps that you can set for around 48 to 50 dB of gain. You can get away without a step up. So I wanted to make some of our high performance, low output designs as medium output designs for people that had preamps that could accommodate that, because it was a way to kind of get the best of both worlds. But I'm bucking the current here in the market. So the marketing people took me in a back room and beat me up soundly and said, don't confuse your customers. And, you know, an engineer kind of wants to build everything he can build to solve problems. But I've managed to create problems for myself by confusing others and myself. So.
Okay. All right. The next question. Let me look and see where we're at. How has the pandemic affected your business?
Badly. I caught the virus back in April. I've always been a fan of biology, and ever since I was very young, so I read a lot of journals, and the natural world's always been a fascination to me. So when this thing first started, I had enough of a lay knowledge in biology and virology that I got immediately worried real fast. So I sent all of my employees home March 1st, and we very carefully gave them microscopes, tools, components. I arranged to have one employee go around between all their houses, and you know, it was 100 miles for some of them, to pick up and deliver subcomponents. And I stayed here at work trying to do the work of 13 people, or a lot of the work. And then when we couldn't do a lot of work, I had to dip into my life savings. So I'm sorry that's so personal, but I used up pretty much all my life savings paying the salaries of my employees, because it was the right thing to do. So I'm hoping I'll just drop dead one day and not have to retire. So I've got any money to retire with. I caught the virus. I mean, I know enough about virology and biology where I only went from home to work. I was masked, I washed my hands, I had alcohol, I caught it anyway. Unbelievably contagious. And I was real sick for a month. I was home alone, and I was real sick for a month. Fortunately, I had done enough reading where I was taking vitamin D every day back in January, and that kept it from going into my lungs. And now the research is out showing that it does prevent pulmonary complications, and I'm glad I was aware of it. Right now, working is really hard. We've lost a number of employees, trained employees, and I don't want to hire anybody else because I'm trying to bring nobody else in. We have people with elderly parents, so we're trying to be as absolutely careful and considerate as possible. I can tell you, I've certainly put ads out for people, and interestingly, there are not a lot of people to hire. You may hear in the news a lot of people are out of work. Well, they're on unemployment, and they're not looking for jobs. And that's just the truth of the matter, because I've placed ads for 50 years, and I know what kind of response I always get. And that's been cut by 90%. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on out there. The ones that did apply were generally not very hireable. So it's affected us badly. And like I would say, the people that are here, there's so much heart and soul, it's ridiculous, because everybody's working their butt off, doing jobs they didn't have to do before, not grumbling, not complaining, and keeping the doors open as best as we can and keeping Soundsmith afloat. And I'm very, very grateful for them, because I could have pulled the plug and just said time to retire, but I made a decision not to, for their sake, and obviously with the hope that I could one day retire and, you know, make some money. So sorry to go on about it, but yes, it's affected us badly. And, you know, but then again, there are people that are a lot worse off than we are, because there are so many people that have become homeless and have lost everything. And I mean everything. I've still got, you know, all the stuff here. I've still got, you know, what's left of my business. As a joke, you know, I started this business 50 years ago with nothing, and I've still got half of it left. I never thought I would live that joke, but I am. So, you know, there's always somebody a hell of a lot worse off than I am. So I'm just grateful that yeah, we're still here.
So this is from Jay. My Zephyr Mimic attracts very little dust. Should I be cleaning every album side?
Wow. Yeah, I don't know what you're doing wrong with your record cleaning, but yes, you should be changing your record cleaning process. Shouldn't attract, I mean, the cartridge and stylus shouldn't pull up a lot of stuff with each play, so your records are not clean.
So Peter, I was saying it attracts very little dust.
Little.
Almost
little
nothing.
Little, I thought you said a lot, sorry.
No, little.
So what is the question?
Should he clean his records? I guess with every play, right?
No,
Yeah, that's the question.
I clean my records about, so no whining.
No, it's my question is, should I clean the stylus after every play?
I would.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I would. Sorry.
Okay. Have you found digitally mastered LPs?
Maybe every
Go
2
on
or
about
3
that?
plays. But, I mean, if you use the blue tack, you're not going to hurt anything. You're not degrading anything. I'm sorry, John.
That's okay. Have you found digitally mastered LPs that are as good as analog?
Yes and no. You know, somebody once said the art of communication died when the wireless went to bed with with teletype. That's a really funny statement. And it's brilliant. I didn't say it. I didn't create it. But whoever did, I think it was Mark Twain. He might have said that. The art of communication died when the wireless went to bed with teletype. It's amazing to listen to some old recordings, Red Seal recordings, other mono recordings, and know that there were people that used to be able to see the sound. They knew how to record things. I mean, Wilma Cozart, Bob Fine of Mercury Records, I mean, perfect example. So you can screw up anything. You can screw up a soup sandwich. I'm not fond of the way most recording engineers record things. So not to point a finger at digital and say to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I've heard digital recordings that are gorgeous. And when you cut records from them, they're beautiful. And conversely, I've heard analog recordings that are horrible. And it really depends. It's a chain. If you get a conscious engineer, there's particular artists, I won't mention the name, I'm just very fond of, and all of their albums just sound like you're underwater. It's like, how did this happen? This is a huge artist. How did these records sound so terrible? And yet I've got some other records from Sweden that were recorded with 2 mics on a Studer. And it's like, holy crap, I'm in the church. It really depends on everything. The person who's got the sense of how to record something. Here, I mean, you record an acoustic guitar, you put 1 mic in front of it. How about an XY mic and then shift it left and right? Now you've got a stereo image. Nobody does that. Nobody cares to do that. So it really depends on who's making the recording and then how things go down the mastering process. You have to appreciate when you cut a lacquer, you EQ it because you know that through the subsequent plating processes of 3-step, you're going to lose. So you have to anticipate what you're going to lose and who's doing those processes and how much is that particular house going to lose. I mean, let's talk about being an art and being able to see into the future. It really is an art form. So anything can be screwed up. I guess that's the best answer.
All right. And we know that full well.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is, you might have trouble answering this. Are certain types of cartridges safer to purchase used? And what is the maximum number of hours on a used cart that you would consider?
Well, that's like saying, I want to buy used cars. They're going to be fine. I have no idea how it's been treated, how it's been stored.
Right.
And when somebody tells you it's only been played by a little old lady on Sunday to play church music. So typically, an elliptical of 500, 600 hours, you want to have it looked at. Contact line, 900 to 1,000 hours. Conical, 300 to 500 hours. By the time you hear a problem, it's too late. It's sort of like when you take your socks off and your toes are black, you should have gone to the doctor before. So I can't comment on what's on the open market. You don't know how it's been treated. Some cartridges that I rebuild that are 30 years old, 40 years old are in marvelous condition because of their choice of materials. And other moving coil cartridges that I rebuild some of them are 1 and 2 years old, and the elastomers have already turned to stone. So material selection is really critical. Something that, let's just say an elastomeric material that works great out of the box, you don't know what's going to happen to it when it's in various environments a year down the road, when it's outgassed and it's chemically and molecularly changed. And now what's supposed to be a damping material is now a stone. And if you ask me if I've seen that, absolutely. So are there certain brands that hold the test of time more than others? Sure. You're going to have me name them? No, because I can't do that.
Okay, I'm just answering somebody privately here.
I'm always impressed when I see, a real antique cartridge that's held up. And every once in a while I get involved in a project. I rebuilt a Rochelle Salt crystal cartridge for a friend of my mentor, Richard Majestic. He bought a record changer that dropped 78s, and it had a Rochelle Salt crystal cartridge. Of course, Rochelle Salt, when it's exposed to the environment, fails. So I drilled out the rivets and rebuilt the cartridge with a modern ceramic and built elastomer suspensions for it and so on. And I sort of held it together with little bits of glue, and then I struck the stylus, looked at it on my scope. I got a couple of volts out of it. I said, great, finish it up, put it back together, soldered the rivets, and sent it to this guy. He sent me a video of this thing playing, and what a joy. So every once in a while I get to play, and I build cartridges for cylinders. My friend John Levin makes cylinder players, and I build vertical cartridges for him. And he's played cylinders at conventions, known cylinders, and he said one of them had sleigh bells in the background. Nobody had ever heard the sleigh bells until it was played with a Soundsmith vertical cartridge. And I said, well, that's great feedback. I really love that. And I know why. So, but yeah, every once in a while I get to play.
Okay, this is a question from Fred. What do you think of using enhanced RIAA EQ with the Neumann pole?
Okay, well, I'm not sure what he means by enhanced RIAA with the Neumann pole. I mean, the Neumann cutter heads have 2 resonant frequencies, and the Neumann cutter amplifiers have EQ to notch out those resonances. I'm not sure what he means by enhanced RIAA. The RIAA has changed over time in terms of a 50 hertz roll and other things, but I may not be adept enough to know exactly what he's talking about. So I apologize.
Okay. And David Hicks, do you want to talk a little bit about your electronic repair services? From your videos that I've seen, it looks like you'll repair almost any manufacturer's equipment. True?
I'm sorry. I thought
Is that true? Is that true that you?
Okay, I'm sorry. Did you notice what happened there? I went back to the planet. I went back to the other planet for a moment. I apologize.
Yeah, you did. Okay, I'll repeat the question.
No, I understand it was for me now. So yeah, I've loved repairing things my whole life. It's funny when their parents that sort of don't get it. They give a toy to their child, and their child runs it across the rug a few times, and then they come back in the room and it's all in pieces. And like, oh my God, it's a brand new toy. Well, the kid wants to see how it did what it did. He's learning. So that's kind of how I was. Everything had to come apart. So I've been doing that my whole life. I've always loved fixing things. And the real challenge with fixing things is that things break because they have weak links. And the way I've taught people to do repairs is to understand what the weak links are and engineer around them. So when we repair a piece of classic equipment, obviously we have 50 plus years of technical data because I've kept careful notes. So they're always the same parts typically always fail within a given model. So when something comes into us, we automatically replace those parts whether they failed or not. Plus, if we learn anything new, we do that, plus the obvious failure if an amplifier channel is blown up. So we do really involved repairs. We're very selective about what we work on. we put a 1-year warranty on the whole piece when we're done. It's not a 90-day parts and labor. Do we work on almost anything? We used to when I had 9 engineers that I'd trained. That's not the mainstay of our business now, so we're even more selective. But yes, I'd like to think I've worked on everything that had a plug on it. And if it didn't have a plug on it, I'd put one on it. So I don't think there's much that's been produced that I haven't seen or worked on in my life. Every once in a while I get surprised, but it's not very often. Some of the engineers that I've trained, if I come over to their bench and they're working on something and I go, well, make sure you check such and such resistor and this and that and the other, and they come back and say, how did you know that? I said, there's not a logical thought in my head, but I do remember everything I've ever worked on. So, and common failure items.
All right, so I've got a follow-up from Fred on that question earlier about the enhanced RIAA.
Okay.
CH Precision has an enhanced RIAA curve to compensate for cutter resonances.
Okay, so he's talking about the resonance. Okay.
Right.
So both the Ortophon and the cutter head, I used to have a chart here. I was just on the phone with somebody the other day. I had an Ortophon cutter head, and they were asking me a lot of questions, and I have a couple of Ortophon cutter heads, and I can show you the chart. But if you look at the response, can I grab it? This is interesting. So give me 30 seconds. I'm going to grab the chart and show it to you. There are miracles in audio. Like cartridges, they shouldn't work. Like a bumblebee shouldn't be able to fly. So cutter heads shouldn't work. They just totally shouldn't work. Here is the resonance of an Ortophon cutter head. Good Lord, look at that. So you would say, wait a minute, how can that ever produce a flat output? Well, unless you do something, it won't. The Neumanns have 2 of those points. So the amplifier circuitry has 2 filter circuits to know those. I'm always impressed. I love it when a miracle happens. It's like that joke with the blackboard. It says E equals M, and then underneath it says, and then a miracle occurs. Cutter heads are just bloody amazing. And yes, do they have to correct for the physics of mass in motion? You bet. There's your nasty resonance. And so when you're cutting with a Neumann cutter head, the electronics in the cutting amplifier are matched pretty well to that cutter head to try and flatten the bad boy out. So I hope that's what you're talking about. And yes, it's a miracle. And yes, I'm amazed.
Okay, there was one question I skipped over and I didn't mean to. It's G. Morgan. Where is the Ortophon paper available? Is that online, Peter? That Ortophon?
No, it was online, but please don't ask me where I found it. It's, yikes, sorry. I don't know where I found it. I just grabbed it a long time ago.
Oh.
And I got to that point and I went, oh, I love this. I love this. They ran the football down to the 2-yard line and nobody was following the guy and he put the ball down. And I don't like football, but I thought, well, that fits.
Interesting to bring that up in the playoffs. So, yeah. I think we're through the questions unless I missed something. I'm going to go back to Q&A.
This one, can you speak to exotic materials used in cartridges like cactus spines? So, yeah, I think I would like to say something about that. I touched on it earlier where I said, I like to look at dark corners of engineering where things have been made to work but not been perfected. Certainly, there have been people desperate in audio. I've certainly been desperate at more than one occasion, but I try not to, I stay away from snake oil. There's enough of it in every industry, and there's plenty of it in audio. So do people tout using, material, using unobtainium? Hey, I've used some unobtainium in my cartridge, and oh my God. So there are very few breakthroughs. I don't make moving coil cartridges because I consider them vastly inferior to correctly made moving irons for a lot of reasons you'll see in my lectures and talks. But there are people that tout different magnet technologies and different permeabilities of iron and this, that, and the other, and so on and so on and so on. And it's like, these are tweaks and not even really technically presented, in a fair way as to why it improves the product. I don't care for that. So there are a lot of exotic, materials, but whether they really add to things. So when something exotic works, that's wonderful. But I don't see a lot of invention. To me, moving coil cartridges, I'm going to say something bad here. To me, moving coil cartridges are like cars designed in the 40s and the world ran out of gasoline. And then we found a whole bunch of gasoline again. And they said, great, let's start making cars again. But the cars they're making are from 1940 because nobody advanced the technology. I work with the technology that I work with, moving irons, because it doesn't have a ceiling. Moving coils, you can only reduce the armature, the mass, just to the point, and you're done. You're pretty much done. The designs that I make had so much room for advancement that I was thrilled to get the license to do it. And Bang & Olufsen went through 3 generations of design over 25 years. Over the past 30 years, I've gone through 4. And do I still have ideas? You bet. And the beauty of it is this bad boy hasn't hit a ceiling yet. That's one of the many reasons I was so interested in the technology.
All right, Peter, that is really great. It's 5 minutes of the hour, and we filled it up with questions.
Well, I'm very appreciative for everyone giving me this time, because those that know me know that nobody likes to hear me talk more than me. So you've given me this tremendous opportunity, and I appreciate it very, very much.
You've been great, Peter. Thanks.
On the chat bar, I put my email address. You can address me for some questions, but I also said go to our website, and I put up the website. If you click on any of the cartridges that we have, you can just click right there on the strain gauge when you open it up. You'll see Peter's videos, and you'll also see a great tour of Soundsmith with the late great Art Dudley from Stereophile magazine. It's really, really special. And, with a couple of minutes left, Peter, we haven't touched on DirectGrace.
I really appreciate that. So I do have a charity record label called DirectGrace Records. My folks were Holocaust survivors, and they instilled a number of really important things in me. And I got to a point in life, I feel like I've given out, tried to make the world better. If I can teach one or more people, I've improved the world. And I have to say, I've taught a lot of people. Somebody asked me on another Zoom session, they said, what's your greatest accomplishment in audio? And I said, it's creating jobs for people and training people. That's really it. I mean, that takes such a high point above everything else. But I became aware through friends of mine who were filmmakers that there are 215 million children in the world in severe forms of slave labor, children that would literally be better off dead. And I decided I've got to squeeze something in. And it was literally miraculous for those of you that believe in the invisible world, that it supports the visible, as I do. We know that from physics, but it exists, I think, in other realms. It's not limited to physics. Once I committed to it inside, just miraculous things happened. I wound up getting 2 lathes miraculously. Recording engineers I didn't know started showing up at our door saying, it was like Field of Dreams, saying, I don't know why I'm here. I'm supposed to be here. And I'd chat with them and I'd say, all right, I know why you're here. And musicians like Bill Frisell and John Pousset-Dart and others, Elio Villafranca, have volunteered. And we've recorded them live, direct the disc. The DirectGrace project, we haven't rescued a lot of children, maybe 400 from a fate worse than death. But I sleep really well at night because of that. If you have some money, we still have some records left. The Elio Villafranca record, what a great album, double album cut live here. It's got great jazz musicians on it. He's ridiculous. He's off the charts. We have a brand new secret album we're going to come out with in the near future. I'm very excited about it. Just watch the DirectGrace website. We're hopefully a big splash about it. So all kinds of things happened. Doors opened. Even recently, some miraculous doors opened to us. I can't divulge it, but we're looking for somebody to help with the project. Musicians, well-known musicians, we'd love them to come on board. You know, we'd love to produce albums of session recordings, because audiophiles love to listen to that stuff. That's stuff that's sitting in a can. It's never going to help anybody. Imagine rescuing some children with it. So if any of you know some really famous musicians, please get them to, we don't want money. We want their talent. And if they want to record live here, that's great too. But we're looking for an executive director, somebody who's retired and wants to further the project. I have had a few people volunteer their interest, and the more the merrier. You know, these children were off the chart, off the map years ago. And now with what's going on in the world, they're just not in the presence of mind of anybody. So just think about 215 million children who would be better off dead. And we rescue a handful at a time. So I appreciate having the soapbox to talk about something that really does help me sleep at night.
Yeah, and I just posted the link, but it's also at the bottom of all of our pages, so you can learn how you can help. And the link is right there.